the Neumann algebra, and various other complex operators, all of which figured into the project in terms of the theoretical background required. Another man who's well known, T. Townsend Brown, was born in 1905. He made his contributions during the war. 1912, the most important man of all that probably no one has ever heard of, was a man who was born in the U.S. in 1912, Dr. Norman Levinson. You can hear little and learn little about him, except he wrote many books on math, but the most important work, that of dealing with the time equations and the time matrix, is still classified. But he was a professor of math, assistant up until 1955 at MIT, and after 1955 full professor till he died in 1976, I believe. These men all made their contributions in a theoretical sense, absolutely essential, because what they were dealing with and were attempting to do was play games with our reality. Now, most people have been taught that we live in a three-dimensional world. Three physical dimensions, we're all familiar with them, we're all taught about them. And there is, of course, a fourth called time. In 1831, P.D. Ouspensky wrote a book entitled Tertium Organum, a new model of the universe, in which he described our reality as being actually five-dimensional. I've since seen some papers which describe it as six-dimensional, but we won't get into that because that's a rather obscure element. The fourth and the fifth, as they found, are both time dimensions. The fourth is the linear component or vector, which is usually described as the flow of time. The fifth was a rotating spinner around the end of the other vector, if you will, which describes, and I'll go into this in my workshop, a locus or circle, a corkscrew, if you will, and that determines the flow rate of time. That was the element which we were playing games with back in the project, which Tesla was working on. And in 1936, they had their first test, which was partly successful. In 1940, there was a fully successful test in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. That involved a small tender with special equipment, and they put it in the Navy Yard. Okay. They put it in the Navy Yard, ran the test, it was fully successful, but with no personnel on board. That is important because of what happened later. The hardware worked. The ship became invisible. However, other problems developed at a later time. So I'm getting patched up all over the place here. It begins to remind me of some of the days back then. Now, we're going to dive into the picture, as well as my brother, Edward Cameron. As I said, I was born 4 August 1916. My brother, 1917. Same father, different mothers. Father was quite a rake. He was in the Navy at that time as an enlisted man, as a bosun's mate. Don't know exactly when he enlisted because you cannot find any records on this. He did, however, go through the World War I period, stayed on, and I've just found that he was still in the Navy in 1939 as Captain Arnold. Why Arnold, as I will explain. His real name was Cameron. And we do not know even to this day when he finally left the Navy. But he made many important connections. We were raised, and we went into the years, of course, through high school, and there was depression months. We went to college, and the family had lots of money. The Arnolds had married into the family, and there was the Arnold Constable store in Brooklyn and New York. And came the time appropriate. I went to Princeton, and later, at my Neumann suggestion, I transferred to Harvard and took a PhD in math in the summer of '39. My brother, Duncan, decided to go to a different school. He went to the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, took a PhD in math there in 1939. From September '39, thanks to our father rolling out the red carpet in advance for us, we both enlisted in the Navy, were given commissions, went to Providence, Rhode Island for about 3 months, what they call the 90-day wonder school, and were taught what officers are supposed to know in the Navy. And then we were assigned immediately to the Institute as our project. We quickly learned that the physics that we had learned in school was far from the whole story, it was far from complete. We quickly found out about new mathematics, new approaches in time, etc., and what the project was really all about that we were to work on, namely how to make a ship invisible. We joined before the test at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We learned a lot of theory. We helped in construction of equipment. There was the later phases. The heavy equipment was not built at the Institute. So I met Tesla and Von Neumann, and so did my brother. There we were in the Navy. We were writing reports for them at an office in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, as well as an office down at the Institute. So came the successful test in later part of 1940. They immediately classified the project, and it was renamed Project Rainbow. A certain gentleman in the White House, known as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was elated because he was a Navy man and he had been pushing the funding of this project. And of course, Tesla, who had already been named director in 1934 by Mr. Roosevelt, was also elated. Roosevelt said to his friend, he says, well, I have full confidence in you. If you can make a small ship invisible, I'm going to give you a battleship. If you can make that invisible, you can make anything invisible. So we had his battleship, and the progress of the project went onward from that point under classified wraps. In January 1941, the Navy decided that Duncan and myself had to find out what the Navy was all about and go out to sea. So we were placed on the USS Pennsylvania from January 41 until approximately October, when the Pennsylvania came into Pearl Harbor and it dried out for overhaul. All a matter of public record. We spent a lot of time there and then went to San Francisco. And on the 5th of December, we were about to board the plane to go back to Pearl Harbor. This is 5th of December, 1941. We were stopped at the door by a captain who said, your orders are canceled. Follow me, and we were taken upstairs to meet with Hal Bowen Sr., Rear Admiral, who was then director of the Office of Naval Engineering, now known as the Office of Naval Research. They changed the title in 1946. He told us, gentlemen, your orders are canceled. We know that the Japanese are going to attack us within the next 48 to 72 hours, probably Pearl Harbor. You're much too valuable to us to have you go back there. You will stay in San Francisco, do some paperwork, because that's the home port for the Pennsylvania, and when your time for the tour of duty is over, you will be returned to the Institute. You'll then have no leave time and lots of hard work, so make the most of it in the meantime, and we did. What sailor has never had a good time in San Francisco? Back to the Institute in 42. Preparations are well underway for the battleship test. We met Tesla and all the other people involved. Tesla was very upset. He knew there was going to be a very serious problem with personnel. He was afraid there'd be some dead personnel. So we went to the Navy for more time to make corrections. They refused to give him more time and said, you have an assigned test date. There's a war on. Where have we heard this before? And just meet your test date, do what you have to do, but you have a date, make it. Tesla had two choices. One was to go ahead with the test and hope for the best. The other was to sabotage the test or otherwise cancel it, which he did. He sabotaged it by detuning the equipment so there would be no effective invisibility and consequently no effect on the personnel. The test was a failure. He so declared it, first time in his history, and said, we have a very good man here to take over, Dr. John Van Neumann. He will be your new director, and he was. It wasn't too long after that, of course, Tesla turned up dead, 7th of January 43, in his hotel room in New Yorker, and of course the world knows the balance. Von Neumann took over, said he would have to find out what was wrong, quickly found out what was wrong, decided to take advantage of the time and totally redesign the equipment. The original approach by Tesla was what would be called an analog approach. All the equipment was on continuously, but was modulated with 4 separate different waveforms, very complex, in which they were using 2 modalities. One was a power generator at a certain frequency to drive 4 Tesla coils, not the typical type Teslas, but conically or derived ones. Now we're on the top, sitting on the deck of the ship, driven with high pulsed power in the later version, continuous analog power in the earlier version, plus 4 RF transmitters of 0.5 megawatt each, of which the antenna was sitting someplace up on the mast, and was later a very special antenna on the Eldridge. 2 megawatts of RF power, plus the power derived for those coils, Tesla knew that there would be trouble because up to that point in history, so far as we knew, no human body or mind had ever been subjected to that much electromagnetic energy.